My mother drained my $6,500 college fund to give everything to her stepchildren. I cut her off at 18. But now that Jason and his kids abandoned her, she's back begging for forgiveness. I'm 24 years old. I work in marketing at a small company here in the Midwest. And honestly, I need to tell this story because what my mother did to me basically forced me to build my life from scratch when I was barely a kid. And the craziest thing is that now, after years of not talking to her, she shows up again like nothing happened, like she could just apologize and everything would be okay. But anyway, I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand why things are the way they are. When I was 16, my mom, Karen, met this guy named Jason on, I don't know, I think it was some dating app or maybe at work. I don't remember exactly. The point is, she met him and literally within months, she had already brought him to live at our house along with his two kids, Tiffany and Austin. Tiffany was my age, like a few months younger than me, and Austin was 2 years younger. And look, I understand my mom wanted to rebuild her life after my dad died when I was like 12. I mean, I don't blame her for wanting to find someone, but the speed at which everything happened was totally crazy. In less than a year, they were already married, small wedding in the backyard and all that. And suddenly, I had a completely new family that basically invaded my space and my life without anyone asking me if I was okay with it. At first, I tried to be positive about everything. I really tried. I thought, well, maybe this is going to be okay. Maybe it'll be nice to have siblings and a bigger family. But things started getting weird really fast. Jason never had a stable job. Like, he was always between jobs or with projects that never amounted to anything. And basically, my mom became the one supporting the entire family. And I don't know if it was Jason's idea or what, but suddenly I started noticing that Tiffany and Austin were receiving completely different treatment than me. For example, when Tiffany turned 16, they threw her a giant party, like with a DJ and everything, invited, like 50 people. There was a huge dessert table, decorations everywhere, and they gave her a bunch of expensive things, including a new laptop. When I turned 17 a few weeks later, they literally gave me a set of towels. Towels. Can you believe it? And when I asked them about the difference, my mom just said, "Oh, Lily, you're grown up now. You don't need those things. Plus, towels are practical." Practical. As if at 17, the only thing I wanted in the world was bath towels. But that was just the beginning. Really. And things kept getting worse little by little, and I didn't know if I was exaggerating or if they really were treating me differently. Like, I started feeling invisible in my own house. You know what I mean? One day, I came home from school and it turns out they had converted my room where I had lived since I was a kid, into a study space for Tiffany because apparently she needed a quiet place to do her homework. And they moved me to the tiny guest room that was basically a glorified closet. Literally only my bed and a small nightstand fit. When I protested, Jason told me to stop being selfish, that Tiffany was applying for scholarships and needed to concentrate, and my mom just nodded and told me to be understanding. I was applying for the same scholarships, by the way, but nobody cared about that. Then we get to what really destroyed everything, the moment that changed my life forever. When I was 18, almost graduating from high school, I went to check my college savings account. My dad, before he died, had left a fund for my education. It wasn't a fortune, but it was like $6,500 that he had saved for years specifically so I could go to college. I had been planning my life around that money. I was going to go to state university, get a part-time job, and with those savings, I could cover at least the first 2 semesters without getting into so much debt. But when I tried to access the account was empty. Completely empty. $0. At first, I thought it was a bank error, like a technical problem or something. But when I talked to them, they told me that my mom, who was the co-holder of the account because I was a minor when they opened it, had made multiple withdrawals over the last 2 years until she completely emptied it. I still remember that moment. Sitting in the bank parking lot in my old beat-up car that I had paid for myself with my weekend waitressing job, looking at the statement showing all the withdrawals, and feeling like someone had kicked me in the stomach. I couldn't breathe properly. I literally felt like I was drowning. I drove home so fast I probably broke like 3 speed limits, came in furious and confronted my mom right there in the kitchen. I yelled at her, showed her the statement, told her, how dare she steal the money my dad had saved for me, for my education. And you know what she told me? With the calmest face in the world, she told me, Oh, Lily, don't be dramatic. I didn't steal anything from you. I just used that money for family things. Tiffany and Austin needed school supplies and uniforms and extracurricular activities. We all have to pitch in here. I stood there, unable to believe what I was hearing. I told her that money was mine, that my dad had saved it specifically for me, not for her stepchildren he didn't even know. And she just kept repeating the same thing, that now we were a family and we all had to contribute, that I was being selfish, thinking only of myself, that Jason and she were doing the best they could with 4 kids. 4 kids? As if I was a burden just like the others, as if I wasn't her real daughter, the daughter of the man who had been her husband for years and who died leaving that money specifically so I could have a better future. I was so angry, I was literally shaking. My hands were sweating and I felt like I was going to throw up or explode or both at once. Jason appeared at that moment and started yelling at me not to talk to my mother like that, to lower my voice, to be more respectful. And I yelled back that he wasn't my father and had no right to tell me what to do, especially after they had basically stolen my future to spoil his kids. Tiffany was listening from the stairs, all dramatic as always, and came down crying, saying I hated her, and she hadn't asked for any of this. And it was true she hadn't asked for anything, but it's not like she had ever rejected all the benefits she received at my expense, right? Austin wasn't even home. I think he was at some baseball practice that of course the family paid for completely, including the expensive equipment he needed. That night, I packed everything I could in 2 suitcases and some trash bags, all my important things, photos of my dad, my documents, my clothes, my books, whatever would fit basically. I called my cousin Samantha, who's like 10 years older than me and had always been super protective of me since my dad died, and told her everything crying. On the phone, she lived like an hour away in a small apartment but told me to come immediately, that I could stay with her as long as I needed. So I grabbed all my stuff, put it in my car, and left that house without looking back. My mom tried to stop me at the door. She grabbed my arm and told me not to be stupid. Where was I going to go? That without money I wasn't going to be able to do anything. And I just pulled away and told her I would manage on my own like I always had. That obviously she had already chosen her new family over me, and I was no longer her responsibility. Moving in with Samantha was probably the best thing that could have happened to me in the middle of all that mess. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital and had crazy shifts but always found time to help me organize my life. The first few days were horrible. I'm not going to lie. I cried all the time. I was angry. I felt betrayed and lost, and didn't know how I was going to pay for college without those savings. But Samantha helped me make a plan. She got me a job at the hospital where she worked, in the cafeteria. And I also kept my waitressing job on weekends. I was basically working 7 days a week, but I needed the money if I wanted to have any future. I also enrolled in community college instead of the state university I had originally planned, because it was much cheaper and I could go part-time while working. It wasn't what I had dreamed of. Like I had plans to go to a real university, live in a dorm, have the full college experience, but well, life throws you curves and you have to adapt or you sink, right? So I adapted. I took classes in the mornings, worked at the hospital in the afternoons, and on weekends I worked double shifts at the restaurant. I slept like 5 hours a night if I was lucky, but I was so busy, I didn't have time to think much about what had happened with my family, or what was left of it. My mom tried to contact me a couple of times during that first 2 year. She sent me super casual text messages as if nothing had happened. Like, "Hi honey, how are you? I miss seeing you. We should talk." But I completely ignored her or responded with monosyllables. I wasn't ready to forgive her and honestly didn't know if I ever would be. My uncle Stephen, my dad's brother who lived in another state, also tried to mediate a couple of times. He called me and told me that maybe I should give my mom another chance, that families make mistakes, that holding grudges wasn't good for me. And I understood his point, but I also thought, easy for you to say when it wasn't you who was left without money for college because of your mother's blatant favoritism toward some strangers. Anyway, I kept going with my life. I saved every penny I could, lived super frugally, hardly ever went out with friends because I couldn't afford those things. My classmates from community college would go out for drinks or go to the movies, and I always had to decline because either it was working or didn't have money to spend on that. It was lonely, honestly, but it also made me stronger in a weird way. I learned to depend only on myself, not to expect anyone else to save me or help me. Samantha was amazing, but even she had her own life, and I didn't want to be more of a burden to her than I already was, living in her apartment. When I was 20, I had finally saved enough money and completed enough credits at community college to transfer to state university. It wasn't the traditional college experience because I entered as a junior and also had to keep working part-time to pay rent and expenses, but at least I was there. I was achieving what my dad had wanted for me, even if it was through a completely different path than he had planned. I moved into a shared apartment with two girls who also worked and studied, and for the first time in years I started to feel like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. University was tough but good. I studied marketing because I liked the creativity mixed with strategy, and I also knew it was a field where I could get a job relatively easily after graduating. My roommates were great. We had a good dynamic where we all respected each other's spaces and schedules, and I finally started making real friends. People who knew me as Lily, the hardworking marketing student, not as Lily, the girl with the horrible family drama. Nobody knew my whole story, and I preferred to keep it that way. When people asked about my family, I just said we weren't very close and changed the subject quickly. I graduated when I was 23, with honors because I basically had no social life, so my grades were excellent, and I got a job at a small marketing company right here in the Midwest, like 2 hours from where I grew up. It wasn't a super glamorous job or anything, but it paid decent for my first professional job and allowed me to finally move into my own studio. Just mine, no roommates, not depending on anyone. It was amazing to have my own space for the first time in my adult life, decorate it how I wanted, buy my own furniture little by little with my own money. You know that nobody was going to come tell me I had to move or share my room with someone else. During all this time, since I left home at 18, I basically had no contact with my mom beyond the occasional Christmas or birthday message that I responded to with a cold thanks and nothing more. I didn't know much about what was happening in her life and honestly didn't care. Samantha sometimes told me things she heard through other relatives. Like that Jason still didn't have a steady job. That Tiffany had gone to an expensive private university. Of course. That Austin was in college too. But I didn't ask, and tried not to think much about them. It was like that part of my life had been a bad dream I had finally woken up from. Then we get to last month, when I was 24, with my stable life, my little job, my apartment, my friends, my routine. One day I get a message from my mom, but this one was different from the short happy birthday or Merry Christmas messages. It was long, like several screens of text, explaining that Tiffany had graduated and was looking for work in the city, but needed an apartment, and that basically Jason, and she couldn't pay for one because Jason, of course, still didn't have a steady job and my mom was about to retire, so her income was going to go down. And this is what left me with my mouth open. She asked if I could help by paying for Tiffany's apartment, like between $1,000 and $1,500 a month. Seriously? Seriously? I read that message like 3 times because I couldn't believe it was happening. This woman, my mother, who had stolen all my college money to spend it on her stepchildren, who had kicked me out of my own room to give Tiffany a study space, who had chosen her new husband and his kids over her own daughter again and again for years, now had the audacity to ask me to pay Tiffany's rent. And not only that, she posed it as if it were the most normal thing in the world, as if I had some obligation to help someone who had never treated me like real family. I responded immediately, didn't even take time to think about it. I told her no, that I absolutely was not going to pay a single cent for Tiffany or anyone in her family, that she had made her decision years ago when she emptied my savings account, and I had made mine when I left that house, and that I didn't owe any of them anything. That Tiffany was an adult and could get a job and roommates like I had done, or she could keep living with them until she could pay for her own life. Then I blocked her on all platforms. Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, her phone number, everything. I didn't want to keep receiving messages trying to make me feel guilty or manipulate me into changing my mind. But of course, that wasn't the end. A few days later, I get a call from an unknown number, and like an idiot, I answered thinking maybe it was from work or something. It was Jason. Jason, who probably hadn't spoken a word to me in years, was suddenly calling me. And he started with his spiel about how I was part of the family, that families help each other, that I was being selfish and resentful, that just because something happened in the past didn't mean we shouldn't support each other now. I let him talk for like a minute, listening to all his manipulative shit, and then I interrupted him and told him exactly what I thought. I told him he wasn't my family and never had been. That from the day he arrived at our house, he had treated his kids like royalty while treating me like a second-class citizen, that he had supported my mom in stealing my education money to spoil his kids, and that if Tiffany needed money for an apartment, maybe he should get a real job for the first time in his life instead of living off my mom's money and now trying to live off mine. He was quiet for a second, and then started yelling, saying I was ungrateful, that my mom had raised me and taken care of me my whole life, and this is how I repaid her, that I was a horrible daughter. I just laughed, like a bitter laugh, and told him to go fuck himself and hung up on him. Then I blocked that number too. Samantha called me a few days later to tell me that apparently Jason had given my mom an ultimatum. Either she found a way to pay for Tiffany's apartment, basically taking money out of her retirement savings or something like that, or he was leaving. And my mom, because apparently she hadn't learned anything in all these years, started taking money out of her retirement fund to pay Tiffany's rent, like $1,000 and change every month directly from the savings that were supposed to support her in her old age. All while Jason still wasn't working, living his life without worries, while my mom literally destroyed her financial future to keep his adult daughter happy, who could perfectly well get roommates or a better paying job. But why would she if mommy always rescued her? This continued for like 3 or 4 months, according to Samantha. My mom slowly emptying her savings, stressed and probably not sleeping well, while Jason didn't lift a finger. And then, out of nowhere, Jason left anyway. Because of course he did. Guys like Jason don't stay when things get tough or when they can't squeeze more out of people. He left and took half the remaining savings because technically they were married and he had a legal right, and he also took my mom's car that was in both their names. He left her basically with nothing after years of living off her money and manipulating her to treat her own daughter badly. And then, as was to be expected, I guess, my mom contacted me again. This time from a friend's Facebook, because I had her blocked on her personal account. She sent me a long message asking for forgiveness for everything, saying she had been a fool, that she should have listened to me, that Jason had manipulated her and she had been blind, that she had made the biggest mistake of her life prioritizing them over me. She said she didn't expect me to forgive her, but she needed me to know she was sorry, that she regretted every decision she had made since she met Jason, and that if I ever wanted to talk, she would be there. I'm not going to lie. When I read that message, I felt a bunch of mixed emotions. On one hand, I was still angry. Like I still vividly remembered the moment I discovered my account was empty, the feeling of betrayal, all the years I spent working like crazy and living on the minimum while Tiffany and Austin had everything they wanted. But on the other hand, she was my mom, you know, the woman who raised me after my dad died, who took me to school every morning before that, who read me stories before bed when I was little. It was complicated and confusing, and I didn't know what to feel or what to do. I responded after, like a week of thinking. I told her we could meet to talk, but it wasn't promising anything, that I would listen to what she had to say, but that didn't mean we were going to have a normal relationship again or anything like that. We agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop, not at her house or mine, some public place where neither of us would feel too uncomfortable or vulnerable. I saw her like 2 weeks ago. She arrived at the coffee shop and she looked old. Honestly, much older than I remembered. She was like 52 but looked 60 easily, with a bunch of gray hair she hadn't dyed, somewhat worn clothes, deep dark circles. I felt a little sorry seeing her like that, but I also thought, well, these are the consequences of your decisions. We sat with our coffees and there was an awkward silence at first. Neither of us knew how to start. Finally, she spoke and basically told me everything that had happened since I left. How Jason never really worked, always with excuses and projects that never materialized. How she worked double shifts to support the whole family while he spent his time at home watching TV or playing video games. How Tiffany and Austin basically had him on a pedestal and always treated her like the villain when she didn't give them everything they wanted instantly. And how, when I left, she realized she had lost her only real daughter, but Jason convinced her I was being dramatic and would come back eventually. How when she asked me for money for Tiffany's apartment, she knew it was wrong, but Jason pressured her so much she agreed. How he left as soon as he realized she couldn't keep taking money out of her savings, because there was basically nothing left. She told me Tiffany and Austin didn't even call her anymore, that they had gone with their dad and basically left her alone after years of her sacrificing for them. That now she was living in a small, cheap apartment, still working because she couldn't retire with the few savings she had left, driving a borrowed car from a friend. That she completely understood if I hated her, that she hated herself for what she had done to me. But she wanted me to know I was always her priority until she met Jason, and he basically brainwashed her into believing she had to treat all the kids equally, even if it meant taking from me to give to them. I listened to everything without interrupting much, just asking clarifying questions here and there. When she finished, I told her I appreciated the apology, but I needed time to process all this, that I couldn't just forget years of feeling rejected and betrayed just because now she realized she made mistakes. I told her, maybe someday we could rebuild something, but it wasn't going to be soon, and it definitely wasn't going to be like before. That I had built my own life without her and I was fine that way. That I didn't need her to be happy or successful because I had already proven I could do it alone. She cried a little, nodded, said she understood, and just hoped that someday I could forgive her even a little bit. I gave her a kind of awkward hug when we said goodbye, more because I felt I should do it, not because I really wanted to, and we each went our separate ways. So well, here I am now. I'm 24 years old, a decent job, my own apartment, good friends, a life I built completely alone without anyone's help except Samantha at the beginning. My mom wants to reconnect, but I don't know if I'm ready or if I ever will be. Part of me feels sorry for her because clearly Jason manipulated and used her. But another part of me thinks she's an adult who made choices and has to live with the consequences. Just like I had to live with the consequences of her choices when I was left without money for college at 18. I don't know what's going to happen with our relationship. Maybe eventually we can have something, like talk once in a while or see each other at Christmas or something. But it's never going to be a normal mother-daughter relationship because too much happened. Too much damage was done. And that's okay. I guess. Not all stories have happy endings where everyone forgives and hugs and everything goes back to being perfect. Sometimes things are just complicated and broken and you have to learn to live with that and move forward anyway, and that's what I'm doing. Moving forward with my life, building my future, being the person my dad would have wanted me to be, even though he's not here to see it, and my mom chose not to be present for most of the process. It's enough for now, I think.